Good morning, guys. My name is Colton Woods, and I'm here with a 5-year-old warm blood mare by the name of Ella. And this morning we want to talk with you guys a little bit about something that you guys do with your horses every single day, probably multiple times a day, and that's haltering. Haltering is a great opportunity to improve your horse's education. There's some skills and techniques that we can have and that we can teach our horses that'll actually, better their education, make them better to bridle, and prevent some issues down the road. But, initially I want to talk to you guys about these halters. It doesn't matter whether you have a rope halter or whether you have a nylon web halter or leather halter, whatever you decide to use. But these halters were initially designed for a particular way. Someone didn't just string some rope together or some brass pieces and some leather and create these halters. They were designed intentionally. And so the way they were designed was to actually run behind the horse's jaw. Back here, as you can see how this halter is set up. That's super important because as your horse, if your horse were to get sluggish or pull back or something like that, that the contact would be made back here behind the jaw where there's limited nerves. It's just their jawbone and a bunch of skin. You can feel it back there when you run your hand back there. What that does is it alleviates pressure from the pole, because I'll go ahead and show you, you might be guilty, but we won't blame it on any of you guys with your horses, but you'll see horses at places, at barns or shows, and these halters, whatever kind they may be, they sit really low on the horse's face. And so that does a couple of things. One, now the halter is not actually being utilized like it was designed to, because now this, essentially what would be like a chin strap, would be down here below their jaw. But what would happen is that if the horse had to make contact, pulled back, wasn't leading right, it puts a lot of pressure up here on the pole. And our horses have nerves that run from their spinal column up here towards their skull and their brain, and that's sending messages back and forth. It's an information highway, and it's super important that we don't want to damage that, because they've found now that horses that have had undiagnosed lamenesses, and that's after horses have been through veterinarians, chiropractors, the whole gamut. You might be in that boat where you've spent a bunch of money, and through autopsies, unfortunately, you can't fix it at that point, but through autopsies, they found that there's been significant damage up here in the pole that would have caused balance issues or lameness issues for those horses. So one, it's an extremely important thing to make sure that you have your halter fitting properly on your horse, because you would want to protect your horse. You don't want them to have any extra damage or anything like that. But also, our horse, the way that their heads are shaped, Ella's a little sleepy here this morning. Come here, sis. So the way that their heads are shaped, this nasal bone will come down, and it gets more and more narrow the further down their nose that it gets. And so if this part of the nose band is super far down on their nose, there's actually a chance that if they, whatever happened, you pulled on, you popped them, or they pulled back, or whatever happened, too much friction would actually get down here to a very fragile part of their nose, and it could end up breaking that part on their nose. So we would want to protect our horses and make sure that we're not putting them in a position where either we could do damage to their pole, or we would end up potentially damaging their nasal bone. So I'm going to go ahead and show you guys how I'd like to halter my horses, and also the proper way it should fit. So she's loose, just like you might go and catch your horse out of the paddock. Come here, sis. So when their heads are up and say she's straight, I'd like to reach my hand over their neck, and she's kind of helping me out here, but then put my hand just below her ear, right, you can see right here between her ear and her eye, so I can rub on her here, but I'm asking her to essentially like kind of give me a hug. But this is going to set me up for when I want to put a bridle on her and she's not throwing her head to the rafters. And I'll take my left hand with the halter rope, and I've got my fingers separating the two, the loop part that will attach, the halter will go through, and then the rope that'll go across her pole. And I'll reach underneath her chin here, and I'll pull this up. So now she's tipped right towards me, and I can pick this halter up right up her nose without banging her in the eye or flipping it over her ears. I cannot stand when people just pull the halters over their ears. Their ears aren't meant to be crammed back. So this is just a respect thing, and you can get a horse pretty bad about their ears. Now, I prefer that my horse's heads are like this when I go to put the halter on, and I would tie the knot from here. But for demonstration purposes, so that you guys can see how to tie this knot, I'm going to have the horse's head go straight, so that hopefully you guys can see a little bit better on how to do this. First things first though, we want to make sure this is snugged up. We want this noseband to be a little bit further up her nose, and we want to make sure that the back of the halter is back behind her jawbone. So now we've run the rope that comes across her pole through the back of the loop. All right, so then I'm going to take the part that comes through the loop, and I'm going to go behind the loop that the rope is through. So I'm going behind it, and you can see I'm going back down towards her eye. So it's going to come down, and then look at this. This part right here is going to come back through this loop up towards her pole. So as such, and then I like to tuck this in here. I'll do that one more time for you guys, and then since it's on video, you can always rewind this part, and if you need to see it again. What I'm trying to prevent you to do is that a lot of people will try to tie it up here back to closer to their pole, and there's a functional purpose that I'll show you in a minute. But we'll go behind the loop, down towards the horse's nose. Now I'm still holding this part here, and I'm going to go back up towards the horse's pole, and you'll have a nice clean knot just like that. Now, why is that super important? Why would I not want to tie that the wrong way, which would be above this loop? The reason being is if, say your horse is tied up, something worries them, whatever, then if this got really, really tight, like I can pull on this pretty hard, right? And some of these halters, they'll fuse. So if it was tied improperly, chances are if your horse is having issues like pulling back or did something to such an extent that the halter got fused, you'd have to cut this halter off, and chances are that horse isn't quite ready for a pair of scissors to be around their eyes and ears. So like I just pulled on this pretty tight, and when this is tied properly, I can always take this, and this part right here is the loop that's attached to the left side of her face, and I can pick this up and push it back towards her head. And this halter will always be able to come loose because I can push the rope in towards itself and it will come loose again. So I can really pull on this, but you can see this halter is a bit dirty, but when I push down, all this loosens back up. And that's super, super important with any horse. It's a functional standpoint, it's safety for our horses, but we want to make sure that the rope runs behind the jaws, it's snugged up on the horse's nose so that it's not potentially going to damage them on the end of their nasal bone, and we've protected their pole because it's behind here on the jaws, so if they were to pull back or something like that, that it would make contact back here and not put too much pressure on the tops of their poles. So that's the little lesson we have from you guys. Elle she's got to get to work here in a few minutes, but if you guys have any questions about that, definitely let us know. It's going to help you guys with being able to put a bridle on your horse and teaching your horses the heads to stay down. It's safety and all sorts of stuff like that. And so we're going to get after it here, guys. Thanks for watching. If you found it helpful, be sure to tag a friend. If you have questions, put them in the comments below. Greatly appreciate y'all's support, and we'll be bringing you guys another one soon. Take care.